Buenos días o buenas tardes, dependiendo
Good
de
morning
dónde se estén
or good
conectando.
afternoon, depending on
Bienvenidos,
where you
bienvenidas.
are at the moment.
Un
Welcome,
saludo a
everyone.
todos y a todas.
Warm
Estamos muy
welcome to
emocionados
everyone.
por su
We are very
participación en
excited
este
to
diálogo
have you
regional
here with
sobre
us today for
afrodescendencia y
this regional
ruralidad en América
dialogue
Latina y el
regarding
Caribe.
Afrodescendants
Mi
and
nombre es Cecilia
rurality in Latin America and the
Ballesteros
Caribbean. I am
y desde la
Cecilia
Oficina
Ballesteros,
Regional de la
and
FAO
from
para
the
América
Regional
Latina y el
Office of
Caribe,
FAO
esta
for Latin
ocasión tengo
America
el
and the
honor y la
Caribbean.
responsabilidad
Today,
de
I have the
oficiar como
honor and the
moderadora de este
responsibility of
encuentro.
acting as the moderator of this meeting.
Y para puntualizar, este evento
In order
cuenta con
to
traducción
continue
simultánea
on, we
al
have
inglés
simultaneous
y al
translation
portugués.
ongoing into English,
Y
into
para seguir la
Portuguese,
conversación en su
and in
idioma
order to
puede
continue on
utilizar el
and keep
servicio de
up with the
interpretación
conversation in your
seleccionando la
language, feel
preferencia en
free
la
to choose your
pantalla
preferred
aquí abajo a
language
la
using
derecha
the icon,
si es que está
the globe
conectado en el Zoom.
icon down
Y
below if
si
you're using
está
Zoom.
en la web por el sitio
Otherwise,
web
if you're
de FAO
following us
Américas,
through
también
the
eligiendo la
FAO
pantalla de
Americas
idiomas.
website,
Una vez
choose
más,
your
tenemos el
preferred
privilegio
language.
de
Once
compartir
again, we
con
have the
panelistas
privilege of
sobresalientes,
sharing with
conocedores de los
outstanding
temas que hoy
speakers
nos convocan
that are
a esta
people that
conversación, donde
know
la
deeply
invitación
about the
y el
issues
gran
that gather
desafío
us today
es abordar
to
los
this
temas de manera
conversation, in which
precisa y
the invitation is
contundente, de
to
manera que
be
nos
thorough,
involucremos, invitándonos a
is to trigger a
reflexionar, a
conversation,
decidir
to invite
y
everyone
actuar.
to have a conversation, to make decisions, and to
Invitamos
act
a que utilicen
based on
el
that.
chat
We
de
kindly
la
invite you to
plataforma en la que
use
se
the chat
encuentren
box
para poder
in
compartir
whichever platform you're
reflexiones,
using to share
preguntas,
your
cuenten desde dónde
thoughts,
se
your
están
questions, your
conectando para que
comments.
sepamos
Let
todos
us
con quiénes
know
estamos en
where
esta
you are at the
reunión.
moment so that
Y
we all
sin
know
más,
the attendees
entonces,
today. Without further
les
ado,
invito a la
I'd
señora
like
Eve
to
Crowley,
invite Mrs.
representante regional
Eve
adjunta de la
Crowley,
FAO para América Latina y
Joint
el Caribe
Representative of
y
FAO for
representante
Latin
de la
America and the
FAO en
Caribbean
Chile,
and
a
representative
dar
of
apertura
FAO in
a
Chile,
este encuentro.
to
Gracias,
offer
Eve,
the
y
welcoming
adelante.
remarks. Thank you,
Gracias,
Eve. The floor is
Cecilia.
yours.
Muy buenos
Thank
días.
you, Cecilia.
Bon
Good
dia.
morning.
Good
Good
morning, good
morning.
day to
Bon
everyone.
dia. Good morning,
Señor
everyone.
June
Buenos
Summer,
dias.
presidente del
Mrs. June
Foro de las
Summer,
Naciones Unidas
head
para los
of the Forum of the
Afrodescendientes,
UN for
a nuestros socios,
Afro-Descendants, to
co-impulsores de
our
la iniciativa
partners
de
that are co-promoting
afrodescendencia
the
y ruralidad,
initiative on
la Comisión
Afro-Descendants and
Económica para América
Rurality,
Latina y el Caribe,
the Economic
ECLAC,
Commission for
la
Latin America and
Universidad
the Caribbean,
Javeriana de
ECLAC,
Colombia y su
the
Observatorio de
Universidad
Territorios
Javeriana of Colombia and its
pertenecientes en
Observatory of
Colombia.
Territories in
Agradezco
Colombia.
profundamente
Is a
la
key
labor de
partnership
visibilizar y
in the
reconocer
work
los derechos
of
de nuestros
giving
pueblos
visibility and acknowledging the rights of
afrodescendientes.
our Afro-descendants
Un
people.
reconocimiento especial también a la red de
A
gerentes
special
de
recognition to the
proyectos
network of
internacionales de la
project
FAO y
managers of
jóvenes
the regional
Latin
office of
Executive,
the FAO for
cuyo
Latin America
impulso
and the
ha sido
Caribbean,
clave para
because its
completar
work
este
has been
encuentro.
key in order to carry out
Saludo
this
con
meeting.
respeto a los distinguidos
I'd like to
participantes,
respectfully
representantes de
welcome
los
the
diversos
distinguished
países
representatives
de nuestra
from
región,
the different countries in our
gobiernos,
region, representatives
organizaciones y
of
movimientos
the
sociales
governments, different
afrodescendientes
organizations, social
y
movements,
también como a los
Afro-descendants,
invitados
and also
especiales
I'd
que
like
nos
to welcome our
acompañan
special
hoy.
guests that are joining us
Para la
today.
FAO es un honor
For
darle
FAO, it
bienvenida
is an
al
honor
diálogo
to
regional
welcome you to this
sobre
regional dialogue
afrodescendencia y
on
ruralidad.
Afro-descendants
Este
and
es un
rurality.
espacio para
This
profundizar en
is an
temas
instance
cruciales que
to
nos permiten
address
avanzar en
in
el
depth key
reconocimiento y la
topics that allow us
reivindicación de
to
los
move
derechos de
forward
los
in the
pueblos
recognition
afrodescendientes.
and the reivindication of the rights of
Valoramos
Afro-descendants.
profundamente su participación en este evento, una
We kindly
oportunidad
welcome
para
you and we
compartir
thank
los
you for
desafíos
participating in
actuales y
this
las
event, which is an
oportunidades del
opportunity
futuro.
to talk about current
Juntos
challenges and opportunities.
identificaremos caminos que
Together, we
fortalezcan
will
el diálogo hacia
identify
objetivos y
pathways to
aprendizajes
strengthen
logrados juntos.
achievements
Hoy
already
tenemos especial
fulfilled and to
atención
open way
en
to
los
new
retos que enfrentan
ambitions. And we are
las
paying key
mujeres
attention to the
afrodescendientes
challenges
en la
of
ruralidad,
Afro-descendant women
quienes
in rural
experimentan los
areas
mayores desafíos
because
frente
they
a
are
la
facing the greatest
marginación y
challenges in
discriminación.
terms of marginalization
Cuando
and
pensamos en la
discrimination.
experiencia de los afrodescendientes de la
When we
región,
think about the
es muy
experience of Afro-descendants
heterogénea.
in the region,
Hay
it is
experiencias en
highly
la cordillera,
heterogeneous,
en el bosque,
depending on
en
whether
la
they live in the
provincia o
mountains,
en la
in the
costa. El
forests,
fácil
in the
viaje por
islands, or along the
la
coastline.
nieve,
Where in Africa do they come from? What's their native language? What is the language of the colonialists that they speak? The different histories of the countries where they currently live. All those factors contribute to the different experiences of the diaspora, but still they have a common experience of a history, of a background of slavery, colonialism, racial discrimination, marginalization, a history that has lasted for hundreds of years of their rights being violated. In our debates regarding sustainable rural development, we highlight the importance of self-determination and the integration of traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge, moving towards a transformation of the agri-food systems to leave no one behind. This is the responsibility and the commitment that encourages us to work tirelessly. As John Atton pointed out, who is in this meeting today actually, the claim for the right to development is not based on current circumstances. It is historically rooted for Afro-descendants people. It has an ideological background. It has an ancestry because just like freedom was the goal of former enslaved people using the palenques as a strategy to achieve that. Now in the 21st century, the strategic goal is to fight poverty, is to fight inequality, is to fight exclusion, looking for a model for sustainable development. This initiative takes place within the framework of what has been established by the Permanent Forum, the Declaration of Buenos Aires from ECLAC in 2023, the decade for Afro-descendants from 2015 to 2024, the decade of the UN regarding family farming, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are also looking at future instances like the COP16 on biodiversity that will take place in Colombia this year, and the COP30 that will take place in Brazil next year. From 2021, through a long process of intercultural dialogue with different leaders and local, national, and regional organizations, we have outlined a regional strategy to improve collaboration with indigenous peoples and with Afro-descendants peoples that revolves around three pillars. First, protection and respect for collective and individual rights of land ownership, territory, and natural resources that are key for the survival and comprehensive identity-based development of the Afro-descendants. Secondly, the contribution of Afro-descendant communities to the sustainable development, highlighting the importance of preserving traditional knowledge. And three, adaptations and adjustments of public policies to act with greater cultural relevance and to promote the development of Afro-descendants in rural areas. We are facing a huge challenge in which we must acknowledge the impacts of slavery, colonialism, and structural racism. It is paramount that we act together in coordination to respond to the historical claims for reparation from the Afro-descendant peoples, based them on historic truth, the long-awaited justice, and an approach based on truly inclusive and sustainable development. From the Regional Office of FAO for Latin America and the Caribbean, once again, we reinforce our commitment towards transforming the agri-food system to turn them into more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and also to move towards better production, nutrition, environment, and lives for everyone, leaving no one behind. Thank you once again for attending this very important dialogue today. We are happy to engage in a dialogue, and we are happy to work together to move forward. Thank you so much, and I will be looking forward to the dialogue. Thank you so much, Eve, for that message, and thank you for reinforcing the commitment of FAO to continue to engage in partnerships to promote the work that Afro-descendant movements, organizations, and governments of the countries have been working on this far. In order to continue on, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. June Sumer, head of the Permanent Forum of the UN for Afro-descendants, for her to offer welcoming remarks. June, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You'll have to excuse my voice a little, but I hope you can hear me loud and clear. And I'd like to thank the FAO Regional Office, which has promoted for the last few years a work program on issues related to people of African descent and rurality, and to bring more visibility to people of African descent, and also to recognize their contributions to climate action, protection of biodiversity, progress on issues related to land tenure and other rights, as well as the right to consultation on those issues that directly affect them. I'm especially pleased that you are undertaking the specificity of women of African descent within rural communities. Because I firmly believe that biodiversity is really important to the Permanent Forum and the work that we are doing as we, I'm really sorry about this, as we partner with Colombia on the COP16. I'm in Geneva, and it is so cold that I caught, the flu one time. So enjoy the warmth that you are having now. And I think that any discussion that we have on biodiversity must encompass things that we do not normally put on the table, like genetic diversity, like cultural diversity, like social structures. And I think that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a significant aspect of biodiversity that has been shaped by history, by cultural exchanges, and by the socio-political dynamics of racism. For those of you who do not already know, the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent is a follow-up to the mechanism to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which is a comprehensive document. In fact, it's a far-seeing document before its time, adopted at the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerances, which took place since 2001. And this declaration, I would urge you to read it because it serves as a blueprint, a global blueprint for combating racism and related intolerances. Our objectives at the Permanent Forum, which are relevant to you today because we have such a wide mandate, are to contribute to the full political, economic, and social inclusion of people of African descent in the societies in which they live as equal citizens without discrimination of any kind, and contribute to ensuring equal enjoyment of all human rights. We also are tasked with considering the elaboration of a United Nations Declaration on the Promotion, Protection, and Full Respect of the Human Rights of People of African Descent. And in that realm, we are going to be doing regional consultations. So we'll be coming to Latin America, we're going to the Caribbean, we're going all over the world to speak to people of African descent so that they can have an input into that declaration on people of African descent. And we are also tasked with promoting greater knowledge and respect for the diverse culture and heritage and the contributions of people of African descent to development of society, as well as to promote an urgent need which we have right now with regard to disaggregated data related to incomes, age, race, ethnicity, sex, disability, etc. So we are taking that kind of approach to our work. And then we offer, of course, recommendations on all of these matters. And so, which is why I'm so happy that we are engaged here with you today, so that we know the kinds of programs that you will be undertaking for people of African descent. Now, since we became operational in 2022, we have had 3 sessions. And these sessions have provided a platform for people of African descent to voice their concerns, experiences, raise awareness about the diverse issues affecting them globally, including migration. So migration from the rural to the urban areas, health issues confronted in the rural areas, especially about with women of African descent who have the lowest maternal statistics globally, education, culture, religious and economic empowerment. And so we have been able to facilitate discussions and dialogues that have led to policy recommendations. And just yesterday, I presented my report to the Human Rights Council on these issues from our 3rd session. And so we are playing a crucial role in advocating for the recognition of the rights and contributions of people of African descent, promoting their inclusion in decision-making at local, national, and international levels. And we have also, through our reporting, shed light on the historical injustices, cultural heritage preservation, economic empowerment, education, and health disparities, and other key areas impacting people of African descent. When we looked at our 3rd session, which is the one we had in April, the theme of which was recognition, justice, and development, we looked at economic empowerment, which remains a challenge for many individuals of people of African descent, even more so in the rural areas, their lack of access to economic opportunities, financial resources, etc. We also looked at cultural heritage and the contribution of our people of African descent who continue to be marginalized in a narrative within institutions that ensure that their cultural diversity is not recognized and their contribution to rural development is not recognized. And so there is an attempt at misrepresentation of the issues related to people of African descent. We also advocate for reparations, which is to hold accountable those people responsible for the crimes against humanity during the Atlantic slave trade and during colonialism. And we believe that the cultural diversity and cultural contributions of people of African descent are profound across Latin America and the Caribbean, and reflect rich African influences and their innovations. We never give people of African descent credit for their innovations. And in many communities, especially rural Afro-descendant communities, the practice of African spiritual beliefs and religions continue to be practiced but remain marginalized and demonized. And this disparaging is also accorded to the languages spoken by people of African descent. Their social, political, and economic status is challenged by systemic racism and discrimination, so that people of African descent still experience higher rates of poverty compared to non-African counterparts. This, of course, is a result of the legacy of colonialism, which has left a significant mark on the social fabric of Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have imposed European norms and values on marginalized people of African descent. Rural populations often experience higher rates of poverty compared to their urban counterparts, and this disparity is exacerbated by racial factors, as Afro-descendants occupy the lowest socioeconomic strata. In many places and in many cases, rural areas are characterized by an inadequate infrastructure, which further limit economic opportunities, poor transportation networks, which hinder access to markets for agricultural products, while insufficient educational facilities restrict skill development, especially among youth, and this contributes to a cycle of poverty. And the issue of land ownership is very critical to us also, and we are working in that direction as we realize that most of the distribution of land was made to those in power, usually the white elite. Another important issue for us is environmental degradation, as well as climate change and its impact on these already vulnerable communities. So in conclusion, I believe that to combat effective racism within the rural context in Latin America and the Caribbean, it is essential to adopt targeted approaches that recognize the unique challenges faced by people of African descent. Policies must focus on equitable access to land ownership, education, healthcare services, and economic opportunities while promoting cultural identity preservation. The neglected healthcare of women of African descent cannot be continued. The specifics are needed, and so the disaggregated statistics are vital. I would like to add that the agency needed in reducing racial disparities, as well as rural disparities, whether they are economic, political, social, environmental, or cultural, is essential. Rural people of African descent cannot continue to be underrepresented in discussions about rural life, where discussions about their well-being are being made. We must take them to the table to share their concerns and solutions. They must be involved in fostering sustainable development within their communities and their regions. In other words, the popularization must stop. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora
Thank you very
Johnson,
much, Madam
por
Yoon,
estas palabras desde el Foro
for
Permanente que
your
nos
words from the
muestran
Permanent Forum that
esos desafíos y los
show evidence
pendientes
on
que
the
tenemos
challenges
en
and
el
the
camino
debts we
y
have
también
in
señalando
the
prioridades
path,
y las
and also
oportunidades.
pointing out priorities and opportunities.
Y esto mismo nos marca un poco la
This same
entrada del
thing
bloque siguiente
sets
en este
the stage for
diálogo,
the upcoming block in
donde
this
los
dialogue,
panelistas desde su
where the panel
expertise
members
van a
from their
abordar los
expertise
principales
will
desafíos
be
también
addressing the main
que hoy
challenges
tienen
also
la
that
afrodescendencia en la
they have
ruralidad en esta
the
región.
African descendant people have
Para
in this
eso,
region.
entonces,
So for
vamos a
this,
tener tres panelistas.
we will
La
have three
señora
panel
Fabiana del
members.
Popolo, jefa
Madam
del área de
Fabiana del Popolo,
demografía e
Chief
información
Demography
sobre
and Population
población
Information
del Centro
Area of
Latinoamericano y Caribeño
CELADE
de Demografía,
Population Division,
División de Población de la CEPAL. El señor
and is
Luis
also
Rengifo,
the
miembro de
Population
la
Division of
Coalición de
the
Derechos
ECLAC,
Territoriales y
Mr.
Ambientales
José Luis
para los Pueblos Afrodescendientes de
Rengifo
América
from the
Latina y el
Coalition of
Caribe
Territorial and Environmental
y
Rights of
coordinador del
Afro-descendant
equipo
peoples
de
in Latin America and the
territorios
Caribbean, and the
naturales del
coordinator of the
proceso
Territories
de
and Natural
comunidades
Resources team
negras de
of the Black
Colombia
Communities
y también
Process of
forma
Colombia.
parte de este
And
panel el
finally,
señor
in this
Richard
panel, we
Moreno,
also have
coordinador
Mr.
del
Richard
Consejo
Moreno,
Nacional de Paz
National
Afrocolombiano
Afro-Colombian
COMPA.
Peace Council
Adelante,
Coordinator of
Fabiana, te
COMPA.
escuchamos.
So please, Fabiana,
Bueno,
the floor is
muchísimas
yours.
gracias. Muy
Well,
buenos
thank you
días a
very
todos y a
much.
todas. Y
Good
bueno, un
morning,
gusto estar aquí.
everyone.
Y
It is a
muchísimas
pleasure
gracias
to be
también
here, and
a
thank
la
you
FAO por
also
llamarnos a
to FAO for
a este
adding us to
conversatorio.
this
Yo la verdad que quisiera
conversation.
compartir con
Truth is,
ustedes
I would like to share with you
algunas reflexiones, digamos, muy generales sobre un
some
documento
general
que
guidelines
estamos
regarding a
ya en proceso
document
de publicación,
that
que hemos
we are in the
elaborado
process of
conjuntamente con la FAO
publishing.
y que
This was made jointly with
precisamente
FAO and
ha contado con
precisely
la colaboración de
has
John
taken
Anton,
the
que está aquí
collaboration
y que nos
of John
acompaña,
Anton,
¿no?
who's here and
Y
who's joining
bueno, la
us
idea de
today.
este documento
So,
en
well, the
realidad,
idea of this document was
verás un borrador que nosotros
to give
presentamos en la
visibility.
clase que
This is a
hicimos el
draft
año
we
pasado
presented in
y
the workshop
que
that we did
lo
last year,
respaldamos, digamos, con los
and we
resultados
provide
de
feedback
ese
with the
taller en donde
results
participaron
of this
organizaciones
workshop where we had the
afrodescendientes
participation of
y
Afro-descendant
desde las
populations and
instituciones,
also
digamos,
from
que
the
abordan asuntos
institutions
afrodescendientes en la región.
that address Afro-descendant affairs in the
La
region.
idea
So
era un poco ver cómo estaba
your
el
idea
panorama, ¿no es
was to
cierto?, del mundo
see how
rural
the general overview of the rural
y
world
también
was for the
poder
Afro-descendant
tener
people,
también algunas evidencias
and also
concretas
have some concrete
sobre la situación
evidence of the
afrodescendiente en el
situation
mundo rural, porque
of the
al
people of
tratarse
African
de una
descent in the rural world,
población que es
because being a
eminentemente
population that is
urbana, digamos,
mainly urban,
la primera situación que ocurre en
the
América
main situation
Latina
that we
es
have
que
in
las
Latin
personas
America, that
afrodescendientes rurales
the
suelen
people of
estar
African descent
bastante
in the rural areas
invisibilizadas
tend
en
to
la
be
política
very
pública.
invisible
Y
in public
estamos
policy.
hablando de que si en América Latina nosotros
And if we're talking
estimamos
that in
hoy
Latin America,
153
we
millones de
estimate
personas
153
afrodescendientes,
million people of African
26
descent,
millones viven en zonas
26
rurales, o sea que
million
es
live in the
una
rural
magnitud
areas.
menor,
It
¿verdad?
is
Y
not
estamos
a
hablando a su vez
negligible
de que
number,
dentro del
and we're
mundo
speaking
rural,
in turn that within
cerca
the
del
rural world,
23%
Close to 23% of the rural population is from African descent. In this way, we see that we're speaking of very important population volumes, and beyond the numbers, what we need to see is that we know because of structural racism and historic discrimination, these are populations that have been very impoverished with lack of infrastructure, lack of access to basic services, as it was already mentioned in the opening remarks. And in that sense, when you see, okay, what indicators do we have based on this, what we're saying, when we look at the poverty rates, we see that in fact, these are not just greater among people of African descent at national level, but also this inequality maintains itself in the rural area where poverty is a lot more acute than in the urban world, and where the gaps even take place in a more acute way, even in countries that have better life standards, such as Uruguay. In Uruguay, the people of African descent in poverty in the rural area is fivefold the non-Afro descendant, and in case of Ecuador, is about double. And these are figures of 2022. So we are speaking of situations that are absolutely critical. When we look at access to drinking water for 5 countries in Latin America that already have the information of the last round of the census, we also see deep gaps in access to water, knowing also that a good part of the African territories have water resources. Therefore, this is a contradiction that is completely unacceptable, because we do know that the issue of water is closely linked to fundamental rights to life. And in the case of, just to make an example with some indicators, in the case of job positions, we see that the unemployment rates are most stark in the rural world of people of African descent as opposed to the non-African descent people. And these gaps are even greater when we add perspective of gender, because of course the most affected group here is women of African descent. So we're talking about paid work, paid labor, because we know that the workload that the women of African descent have in the rural world, um, which is unpaid work in terms of care, in terms of water carrying, in terms of several other activities that are for survival, that are not even valued. But on the other side, the document also highlights not looking only at the impovering, because the impovering is quite real, they were subject to it, but also the African communities have a potential and wealth that is very valuable, especially if we are thinking of the mitigation of climate change, and this ancestral knowledge is fundamental for all of humanity. And on the other side, so these can be strengthened even from the point of view of the strengthening of institutions that are pertaining to the people of African descent in the rural world, so we can promote their development and autonomy. And here we already said the issue of territory. This is also of the most importance. That is, we believe that one of the main challenges or the cornerstone in order to guarantee the collective rights for people of African descent in the rural world is the acknowledgement and the progress in territorial rights. In that sense, we also see that while we have got about 8 million hectares of land that are collected for the Afro descendants, and this is an important step. This represents barely 5% of the used territory historically by people of African descent.
I know that I only have 6 minutes, but I'd like to mention a number of recommendations for the states that have to do with the acknowledgement and land tenure when it has to do with ancestral lands, access to basic utilities in the rural world, labor inclusion, and dignified or decent employment, recognition of ancestral wisdom, implementation of comprehensive cross-sectional policies based on an approach of rights and also with an intersectional approach. And finally, something else that's key, the production and collection of disaggregated information, because you will see that the numbers cover 5 or 6 countries in the region of the 20 countries that have Afro-descendant population. And now we are finalizing the 2020 census, and now there is an opportunity to collect data, to use the census processes. However, we have to strengthen other data sources as surveys, administrative records in order to obtain information in the period between census and to design and oversee public policies. That is all I had to share with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabiana. It was a very important information that you shared. It is impossible to deny the facts, and we thank you for that. Now, Mr. Jose Luis Rengifo, please, the floor is yours. Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you. I think this is a very important instance to express some issues that we believe are important in the processes that have been going on globally. From the Afro-Descendant Coalition of Peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean, we have been developing a number of actions that have allowed us to identify certain challenges that we have globally. These are related, and I think that the data that has been shown matches the work that we've been doing or confirms what we've been doing with RRI and the observatory of the Universidad Javeriana. I think that the information matches. There are certain different approaches, of course. However, there is one point that was just pointed out in the previous interventions, which is the issue of land tenure and territory from the perspective of rural areas, and also the situation of the communities in rural areas. I'd like to point out, because we have limited time, I'd like to point out the data that matches in most of the information, and it is part of a study that we have conducted. We just created with the help of John Anton. Everybody has been mentioning him. He's part of our work team as well. And we worked with John as well as other members of a team representing 6 countries. And we've been working on very specific actions. And the output of that was this mapping that I mentioned earlier. We also know that we're not the only ones, and we were not the first to conduct the work either. However, we did see the need to identify the territories, collective, ancestral, historic territories, taking into account the particularities of Latin America and the Caribbean, meaning that in Brazil, let's say, we have the quilombolos. In Central America, there are other peoples, and there are palenqueros and others. And in Colombia, there are a number of denominations, but we are all pursuing our own claims that we have been working on. And definitely, yes, in some of the countries, we've made progress in terms of our recognition as Afro-descendants peoples. However, we demand global recognition of Afro-descendants peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is something we don't have before certain multilateral organizations. And it shows what the COP16 will present. We are going to be part of that. We have an Afro-descendant forum, but we want recognition of Afro-descendant peoples to have our own voice instead of having it through that. We believe that we are able to address our own issues and our own development, to take it into our own hands. We need to pursue inclusion as Afro-descendant peoples, especially during the COP16, which is going to be a key milestone. And we also believe that there needs to be full participation. And I'm just naming some examples considering the limited time that we have, and I'd like to use the same uh, headlines or using the example of the previous speaker. I'm just going to mention the headlines, but these issues are part of what we've been seeing for a long time. We don't have our own financing available, for instance. So to conduct our activities, we have to go through other instances because we don't have our own financing to help us address our own needs, but rather looking at the needs of donors and what they expect to achieve. Another claim is that in the different declarations that have been issued from the Durban program, we also talk about historical reparation, and it's a very important topic that is cross-sectional to everything related to climate change, biodiversity, access to land, access to fulfilling our needs. And one could find that most of men and women who are Afro-descendants, we have presence. We are in urban areas. However, there is a percentage of people in rural areas that are suffering what you just mentioned. That they are suffering poverty. Furthermore, women in this context, that is why we say that women need to have access to direct funding to help them develop what they need to develop due to the patriarchy, due to all the things that have been pointed out already. You have 30 seconds, please. Yes. I wanted to mention just the headlines. However, for us, we do believe that what's next has to do with the process of strengthening the organizations and also building capacities within the territories. This building of capacities needs to address all the aspects related to youth, women, and Afro-descendants overall present in the territories. Since we don't have or we have little to no funding whatsoever, we need to at least be a part of the decisions that are being made. And with that, since I just wanted to mention the headers, that is all I had to share with you. I think the other speakers that have been working on these, just like Omaida and the colleagues of the Universidad Javeriana could expand on the issues. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jose Luis, and thank you for keeping up with the allocated time. Would like to give the floor to Mr. Richard Moreno. Richard, please, the floor is yours.
Muy buenos.
¿Puedes conectar tu cámara?
Can you please turn on your camera?
¿Me escuchan?
Perfecto.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Listo.
Yes,
Yo voy
loud
a
and clear.
agradecerles la
First of all,
invitación.
thank you so much for the invitation.
Me quedan 5 minutos para conversar. Muchas cosas que se puede
I only
decir,
have
pero
5 minutes,
me uno a las
and there
palabras
is so much to be said, but I'd like to say that I
que
agree
ha dicho José
with the
Luis,
previous speakers. What Jose Luis said is part of the work that we've been doing for a long time, and I'd like to make an announcement and a number of recommendations. One,
no hay que olvidar
and let's not forget, please, that Colombia is one of the countries that has the highest levels of inequality in the world, and also one of the countries with the greatest land concentration in a few hands, especially productive land in the country. And this is a country in which the institutionality itself is trying to deny our existence as Afro-descendant people. Let's not forget that the census in 2018, in 2005, in theory, we were over 2 million people. In 2018, in principle, we were
casi 3 millones.
almost 3 million people. We had to take legal action to at least go back to the previous numbers instead of being reduced in our existence. And they are trying to erase our existence in the territories. Just imagine, what does that look like when we try to have access to tenure, ownership, use, and of land for the communities? And I will try to share with you in 3 minutes what are our claims for you to understand why those claims are responding to structural issues. First of all, there are challenges for inclusive rurality in Colombia for Afro-descendants, and that requires that inclusive rurality in Colombia takes into account the need of transforming the model. We are living in a model which is basically unequal and based on discrimination. And because of that, industrialized countries are imposing the conditions, and Colombia needs to move from inequality to generate equal opportunities and to build a model which is relevant with the approach of using the resources instead of overtaking the resources. Such a policy would allow us to have territorial development that is more compatible with the claims of our peoples. Secondly, we need to stop with the forced displacement, because in Colombia it is a very severe situation which is leaving people uprooted. There is a loss of traditional productive systems, and our peoples are going hungry, and they are suffering that. Over 30% of the population in Colombia that have suffered forced displacement. Of that 30% of population, a large percentage of that, over 50%, is Black or Afro-descendant Palenquera people. And we have to consider that displacement for the Palenquero Raizal people is based on removing them from their own lands, from their territories and natural resources. It is necessary to change the racial background in terms of rural inequalities in Colombia. The trends in the last decade show that there is a racial component in rural inequality. Black people, indigenous peoples in Colombia live in rural areas on a daily basis, and the humanitarian crisis only grows more severe. There is more and more violence. There's more and more impoverishment of our people, forced displacement, and this leads to hatred and structural racism, which is part of the Colombian society. It is part of the Colombian institutionality, and it only shows and materializes in us.
We believe the Black population, as a Black population, we should progress towards a new community rurality. And in this community, we should focus on the topics of our own development or ethno-development that allows us to have our own economy, a solidary economy, and a community organization through the recovery of the uses and customs and the systems of production, linking as the main link the food sovereignty.
Implementar,
So
terminar con la
implementing,
ley 70
we
e implementarla, que nos
need to
llevaría
implement Law
de alguna
70,
manera a
and
tener
that will
mayor
lead
nivel
us
de
to
acceso
have
a
a
recursos
greater
por nuestra propia
access
planificación
to
del desarrollo.
resources and our own
Sigue
planning
siendo
of
relevante
development.
la
It continues to
implementación
be
del capítulo
relevant, the
25 del
implementation
Acuerdo
of
Final de
the
Paz
ethnic
del enclave de
chapter
acceso a la
of
tierra, de tenencia de
of
la
access
tierra,
to
pero
land,
también
land
de
ownership, but
fortalecer los sistemas
also
de desarrollo
strengthening
propio.
the
Y por
development
último,
system of our own. So
reconocer los
finally,
aportes
we acknowledge
que el pueblo
the
negro
contributions
afrocolombiano, racial y
that the
palenquero
Black
ha venido
Afro-Colombian
haciendo a la
uh,
construcción de esta
people have been
sociedad,
making for
de
the
un
contribution of
Estado
the
en paz y
society,
con justicia
of a
social,
state in
pero
peace with
además
social
de las
justice, but
propuestas
also
que como pueblo
of the
hemos
proposals that
ido
as people,
vinculándonos
we
desde
have
lo
been linking ourselves
territorial, lo
from the
nacional
territory, the
y lo
territorial,
internacional.
national,
Muchísimas
and
gracias.
international. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Richard.
Thank you very
Gracias,
much,
Fabiana,
Richard.
y gracias,
Thank
José
you,
Luis,
Fabiana, and thank you,
en este
Jose
panel
Luis,
de
on
inicio.
this panel, on this
Y
beginning
con
panel.
esto damos, con
And
estas palabras de cuáles son los desafíos
with
que
these
estamos
words
atravesando,
regarding what are the
nos
challenges that
vamos
we're
al bloque de
enduring,
cuáles son las
we go to the
oportunidades
block
que
of
tenemos,
what are the
que ya
opportunities
están o que se están abriendo
that
en este
already
tiempo y
are
avanzar.
there or that
Oportunidades
we are
para la acción
opening now to
climática,
open
la
opportunities for
conservación de
climate
la
action, for the
biodiversidad y la
conservation of
seguridad
biodiversity,
alimentaria desde los
and
conocimientos
food security
tradicionales
from
y las
the
acciones
traditional
colectivas.
knowledge and also the collective
Entonces, en
actions.
este panel que sigue,
So in
vamos a
this panel
invitar a
that
la
we have now, we will invite Madam
Renata Simpson,
Renata
presidenta de la
Simpson,
organización Campos
President
de
of
Surinam,
Campus Organization of
al señor
Suriname,
João Pedro Gonçalves
Mr.
da
João
Costa,
Pedro Gonçalves da
director de
Costa,
gobernanza del
National
Centro
Institute of
Internacional de
Colonization and Agrarian
Colonización y
Reform
Reforma
in
Agraria,
Brazil,
INCRA, de Brasil,
the INCRA from
a la
Brazil,
señora Omaira Bolaños,
Madam
directora del
Omaira
Programa de
Bolaños,
América Latina de
Director
Justicia de
of the
Género
Program
de la
of
Iniciativa para los Derechos y los Recursos, RRI, y a Joana Herrera,
Head of RRI, and
de la
also Joana
Universidad
Herrera,
Javeriana de
Professor of the
Colombia y
University
directora
of
del
the
Observatorio
Javeriana
de
University of
Territorios
Colombia, and also
Históricos
Director
y
of the Observatory of
Campesines.
Ethnic and Peasant Territories.
Comenzamos, por favor, con la señora Renata
So
Simpson.
we begin
Adelante,
with
Renata.
Madam Renata Simpson. Please go ahead, Madam Renata Simpson.
Thank you, Cecilia. Good morning. I am Renata Simpson from the Campus Collaboration of Tribal Peoples in Suriname. Campus is the collaboration of the 6 Afro-descendant tribal peoples in Suriname. Thank you to FAO for bringing these different organizations together and to granting me the honor to speak today about the opportunities for Afro-descendant tribal peoples regarding climate action, biodiversity conservation, and food security using traditional knowledge and collective actions. Suriname is sadly the only country on the South American continent that does not legally recognize the collective rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant tribal peoples to their ancestral lands. Even though the Inter-American Court on Human Rights has repeatedly demanded Suriname to do so in several of its judgments. The non-recognition of the collective rights greatly impacts the opportunities of the Afro-descendant tribal peoples when it comes to climate action, biodiversity conservation, and food security. Their efforts to conserve the biodiversity within their territories has to compete against logging and small and large-scale gold mining. Particularly the small-scale gold mining is detrimental to these tribal peoples and their land and their lands because of the uncurbed and lawless use of pollutants such as mercury and cyanide. How can Afro-descendant tribal peoples conserve their biodiversity when they cannot legally protect their lands or the rivers and the lakes, which are their drinking water sources? I am sorry that I started my talk about opportunities for Afro-descendant tribal peoples with highlighting the challenges these people face. But the reality in Suriname is that the challenges negatively affect the opportunities. But we are not without hope. History has shown that the character of the Afro-descendant tribal peoples is perseverance. So despite aforementioned challenges, tribal peoples remain resilient and continue with efforts to achieve the legal recognition of their collective human rights. Tribal people have participated in the draft of the concept law to recognition of the collective rights. But still Parliament is dragging its feet in placing this law on the agenda. Afro-descendant tribal peoples also stay vigilant in finding answers to address the climate change challenges they face, especially to their food security. The almost yearly occurrence of flooding, but also this year's severe drought has had its impact on their food planning. To address this, tribal people are trying and discussing different agricultural methods, such as aquaponics and things like that. Planting different crops and finding new ways to interpret the changing climate. What tribal people need is technical and financial support to, for example, map their ancestral territories and to strengthen the capacities of their tribal authorities to better address challenges, but also the opportunity to learn from other tribal peoples about how they address the same challenges that they face. We thank you for this opportunity to address you and hope for your continued support. Afro-descendant tribal peoples remain resilient, but they need your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata. Continuamos con el señor Joao Pedro.
We continue now with Mr. Joao Pedro.
Adelante,
Please go ahead.
escuchamos.
We can hear you.
A todos e todas. É com muita satisfação que participamos
Good morning, everyone.
deste diálogo. Queremos destacar aí o Escritório Regional da FAO para a América Latina e Caribe em
We're
fazer esse
participating in this
convite
FAO
ao
Latin America and the Caribbean.
esta autarquia
And
que cuida aqui no Brasil das terras públicas, E o INCRA cuida
we're looking
também
after the public
dos
lands.
territórios
And INGRA looks after the territory so well, all the Afro-descendant people that we already spoke of. We talk about the Quilombolas territories, and I would like to recall here an act that we had 20 years ago, 20 days ago, the President Lula in the state of Maranhão, where we found 21 definitive titles of Quilombolas territories of Afro-descendant, and 11 decrees that are residential, acknowledging those territories and the life of Brazil and the history of Brazil. We have a great debt with the Black population, which was enslaved here in Brazil, in this beautiful country that we love.
Então, a
150
presença
years ago.
afrodescendente
It was
está
150
aqui
years of
no Brasil
slavery.
ao
So the
longo do
presence of Afro descendants
território
is here.
rural,
It's here in Brazil,
do espaço
in the
rural,
whole territory,
mas também
in the rural space.
quilombos,
And it is also
espaços
present in Quilombo.
afrodescendentes em áreas
And if these are
urbanas,
spaces for Afro-descendant people, it's also present in urban
agora
areas.
mesmo no desastre que
Urban areas,
tivemos
as I said so
no
already.
sul do
So
Brasil,
now in the
no
disaster that
estado
we
do
had in
Rio
the
Grande
southern
do
part of
Sul,
Brazil,
só na
in the state of
cidade de
Rio
Porto
Grande do
Alegre, a
Sul,
capital do
just
estado,
in
nós
the city of
tivemos
Porto Alegre, which is capital of the
28
state, we
quilombos,
had
28 territórios
28
afrodescendentes
quilombos that are
submersos,
Afro-descendant
tomados
territories
pelas águas. Então, assim,
that
nós
were
vivemos, evidentemente, aqui no Brasil,
underwater
esforço grande de
of the
fazer
floods.
este reparo
So
histórico,
we have a great
esse
effort
reparo
to
histórico,
repair
esse
all of these parts.
reparo
And this is a
ancestral,
historic reparation.
reconhecendo
It is
os
ancestral
territórios quilombolas,
and it
os
acknowledges
territórios
the
afrodescendentes.
Quilombolas
O
territories
INCRA tem esse
and the
compromisso,
territories of
tem esse
Afro-descendants. And
compromisso.
Ingra has that commitment.
Evidentemente que o compromisso do INCRA ele está muito ligado
And the
aos
commitment of Ingra is very much linked
políticos
to
dos governos
the
que se
political
instalam.
commitments of the
Nós
governments
tivemos, antes deste governo que
that are
começou
in store. We
em
have seen these
2023,
in
7
this
anos
government
de
that started
governos
in 2023.
autoritários
7 years of different governments we've had,
que não fizeram
already authoritarian
absolutamente
governments
nada
with a lot of
com a
prejudice that did
agenda
not do
quilombola.
anything
Então, nós
at all
estamos
with the agenda of the
retomando
Quilombola.
essas políticas
So we are
públicas, a
taking back
construção
on
de
these
políticas
public
públicas,
policies
retomando os
and also
diálogos
trying to
com
build
as
new public
organizações
policies and also taking back on the
afrodescendentes,
dialogues with
porque no
organizations
Brasil, diga-se de passagem, eu
and
quero
with
fazer esse
organizations
registro,
of African descent.
eles aqui no
So
Brasil têm uma entidade que é a CONAC,
in
uma
Brazil,
entidade
this has an
mobilizadora,
entity that is ACONATE,
representativa,
which
legítima,
is a
que
mobilizing
pauta,
institution and is legitimate.
que faz críticas ao governo, que faz as
So these
suas
are the templates
exigências. E isso é
that
muito importante no
is criticizing the
sentido
government that
de
also
se
demands this. It's also very
atender
important in the sense
à
of
população
being
afrodescendente. O
able
Brasil vive
to
também,
give attention to
principalmente
the
na
population,
Amazônia, um momento muito difícil
to the population of
do ponto de
African
vista
descent, Brazil and in the Amazonia as
dos
well.
impactos ambientais.
Brazil
Nós temos
is
uma
going is
estiagem
undergoing in
já de
very
4
hard
meses, uma estiagem
environmental
de
issues
4
now. We have a
meses.
4-month
Os
drought
rios,
at this point,
nossos
or
volumosos
a
em
great
água,
drought of
estão
rivers.
batendo recorde
We have
de
large
pouca
rivers
água.
with
Então,
great levels
muito
of water. Now
sacrifício,
we have
muitos
very
problemas com a
little
saúde
water, and that is a
pública,
great
com as
sacrifice. And we have a
queimadas
lot of
e com
problems with
a
public
falta
health,
d'água
with
nestas
fires,
regiões. O governo,
and the
evidentemente,
lack
a
of water
sociedade civil
in these
tem,
regions. And the
tem tido
governments and
uma
the society and the civil
mobilização
society
no sentido de
also
olhar
have had a
essa
mobilization in the sense
dificuldade, essa
of
estiagem que a Amazônia
seeing
passa.
those
E no socorro.
difficulties
Eu estou falando do povo
um,
ribeirinho, eu estou falando dos
where
povos
that the Amazonia
indígenas,
is
eu estou
undergoing.
falando dos
Speaking of
quilombos
the
que existem
indigenous people,
nessa
of the
região.
quilombos that
Evidente que
exist
há
there in
entusiasmo
that region.
do
So
INCRA.
it is
Agora
evident we
mesmo,
have an enthusiasm
nós estamos
of
vivendo
Inca as
nesses
well.
dias uma reestruturação
We're
do
also
INCRA
seeing
e
now a
construindo,
restructuring
criando
of
pela
INCRA.
primeira vez a diretoria
And we are
quilombola.
creating for the
Uma
first time ever
diretoria
the Quilombola
com mais
Directory, which is
força,
a board, which
com
is a board
orçamento,
that
uma
has more
diretoria
strength
para atender, para
with a
dialogar
budget. And
e
this is a board
construir
that will just
políticas
give
públicas
service
para a
and be
população
able to
quilombola, a
build public
população
policies
afrodescendente.
for the
30
Quilombola
segundos.
population, the population of African descent.
Ok? Quero agradecer e nos colocar à disposição para mantermos esse diálogo
I'd like
com
to
os
thank
países
you,
da
first
região
of all,
da
and I'd
África,
like
Caribe, da
to
América Latina,
state
da
that we
Pan-Amazônia,
are
muito
willing to engage
importante,
in a
e
dialogue with the
estabelece
countries of Latin
nosso
America and the
Ministério,
Caribbean and
que
the
é o
entire
Ministério do
Amazon
Desenvolvimento
area.
Agrário,
The channels
doutor
are
Paulo
open. The
Teixeira, aqui nós
Ministry
temos o
of
presidente
Agricultural Development with a minister, and we have our chairperson here who is an agronomist from INCRA. And not only us, we're at your service to engage in that fraternal dialogue. We are willing to engage in cooperation, to work together in order to offer reparations to the discrimination, slavery that Black population was subject of when they came from Africa in order to build up Latin America and Brazil also. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. We are going to give the floor to Omaira Bolaños. Omaira.
Gracias por la invitación y gracias a todos los que están aquí presentes. Mi nombre es Omaira Bolaños.
The floor is yours.
Yo estoy aquí a nombre de la Iniciativa para los
Good
Derechos
morning. I am here representing the Initiative for the Rights and Resources, RRI, as it is known internationally, and our work has to do with the protection of territorial rights of the peoples and communities all over the world and also in Latin America. To talk about the work that we do in relation to Afro-descendants, considering that we are talking about the right of land ownership, it's impossible to work in Latin America, more specifically in the Americas, without Afro-descendant population, because they have been a key part of our history. They are a key part of what we are. They have helped shape our nations from the political, social perspective. They have helped us create our own knowledge, the knowledge that we use for the management and protection of the resources that we have. Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Americas overall, all the ecosystems that we have in this region and in this continent. Therefore, for us working on the issue of territories, it has been from the very beginning a key stakeholder for all the decisions that we make and all the work that we carry out. Likewise, we work with indigenous peoples and other peoples that are not Afro-descendant nor indigenous, but have a community-based relationship with the land. One of the challenges that we have is the lack of data, as it has been mentioned already, data regarding Afro-descendant people. And one of the most important thing is that we lack information, not only statistic information, but also data that is geo-referenced regarding the territorial claims of Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. For over a decade, we've been helping and overseeing processes of the Afro-descendant movements in Latin America and the Caribbean. We continue on in a broader manner. We started the work with the process of the Black communities. Luis Rengifo has been part of our work for many years alongside with other members of the PCN, similarly to Connect in Brazil. And from 2013, we started working on a joint strategy to identify what we could do at the regional level to position Afro-descendant rights as a key issue on the table. The joint work with both organizations has allowed us to work with a broader group. So starting in 2018 with the leadership of PCN and Connect, a roadmap was created that we've been following in order to conduct work that's more specific, that's more efficient around that. And from that joint work, it was that the Afro-descendant coalition was created later down the road. Jose Luis, John, and other people are members of the coalition, and one of the mandates of the coalition has been to map where are we, what is the territorial presence of Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean, because they have been put in statistics from the FAO, ECLAC, the UN, as one joint population without specific data regarding the territorial data. They've been part of the statistics of poverty, but not part of the statistics of development, preservation of resources, climate action. So the data that we have has been quoted here in previous interventions, but I wanted to mention general information. Within the mapping process, we conducted a joint analysis with the entire Afro-descendant coalition around what is the level of territorial recognition that exists in the region. What have we found so far? Of all the countries in Latin America, there's only 8 countries that have developed some sort of a legal framework for the recognition of territorial rights of Afro-descendant peoples. Which are those countries? Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Chile. From the constitutional level all the way to the regulatory level locally, of those 8 countries, there are 6 that have moved on to a recognition within their constitutions regarding the rights of Afro-descendant peoples and also protection that they are entitled to, just like other citizens, but also as peoples. These countries are, once again, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Mexico, and Nicaragua. Of these countries, we have found that there are some countries that do acknowledge, 6 of them actually, I'm so sorry, 4 of them have developed certain specific frameworks, regulatory frameworks that acknowledge the specific rights of Afro-descendant peoples to their land, and that specifically have developed the necessary legal arrangements for the lands of Quilombolas communities in Brazil, Black communities in Brazil, rural and ancestral territories in Ecuador, and even though there isn't a constitutional level of protection, there are certain laws in Honduras for community protection for their peoples. The other countries have moved from recognizing the rights, just like they've done it with indigenous peoples. In this case, we find Mexico, Nicaragua, and in Mexico, there was an interesting case, even though nationally there is a late constitutional recognition that started in 2019. There's still a need for the agricultural regulation to be passed for the territorial acknowledgement, but the state, at the level of the state, there are 5 states in Mexico that acknowledge territorial rights of Afro-descendant peoples, the states of Guerrero, Oaxaca, Coahuila, Veracruz, and actually Mexico City too. So there are certain steps that have been given, and we have to start moving forward. We need to conduct joint work with the Afro-Descendant Coalition and the joint work that we've created with the Javeriana University and all the work that Afro-Descendant peoples have been conducting to achieve a greater commitment from the states that have already acknowledged the Afro-descendant peoples and those that still have to do it. They need to take a leap forward in that acknowledgement. As Jose Luis said it before, another key element in this work when recognizing territorial rights is to acknowledge the key role of Afro-descendant peoples, men, women, youth, elderly, in the protection of the resources that are so important for Latin America, not only for the preservation of biodiversity, but also they play a key role in specific actions toward climate action. That's all I have to say for now. Let's continue on. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Mayra. Thank you, everyone. We'd like to give the floor to Joana Herrera from the Javeriana University in Colombia. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation to be a part of this dialogue. I'd like to take the opportunity to mention one of the most invisible issues around the discussion of the rights of Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America, and it has to do with the presence of peoples in the coastlines. And the debate has been going on regarding expanding the concept of territory to the maritime spaces. This is a concept that in Chile took place, which is the ocean as a space that is occupied or inhabited. And this is key for the discussion around biodiversity because, as we know, the oceans cover 3/4 of the land surface, and they are key for the regulation of the temperature of the planet, and it captures CO2, and we have to include the ocean as part of the discussion that needs to be based on the rights of peoples. We need to include the regulations regarding the coastlines and maritime activities. And in this case, there is a key element that has to be considered and addressed. As Mayra said, the coalition has requested to do a mapping, and at the moment we are trying to collect better data in relation to different ways of living related to maritime spaces and coastal spaces, because we are finding concerning information, concerning data, saying that, for instance, protected maritime areas are created, and just for the Caribbean, 800 protected areas have been created in areas where the fishing rights have not been granted and the sailing rights have not been granted, because the ocean is not only for fishing. In the oceans, there are creations of identity, cultural practices, sailing, communication practices between the peoples of the Antilles Islands, and of course it covers the peoples that are located in the coastal areas of the Pacific. And in the last months, the coalition has been working on collecting data of the Caribbean. And this is a key element in the regulatory framework. We continue to understand the ocean as an empty space, and because of that, regulatory instruments are needed, and they are consistently created without acknowledging the presence of the different peoples. Another element that we would like to highlight is the increase in the urban pressure that is being applied to smaller coastal villages. Many fishermen villages, mostly that based their lives off of that are facing the impacts of climate change, that are having more and more difficulties to achieve food security because of the weather changes and variability, and they're also facing changes in terms of land use management. In an accelerated pace, we have found cities and urban areas that are growing, that are expanding, damaging collective ways of living of the communities, especially in the Great Caribbean, in Colombia mostly, but it has happened. And it has happened in other countries like the Dominican Republic, and urban expansion in Honduras too, impacting the Carifuna and Creole peoples, as well as other patterns of growth, not only from urban areas, but also private developers that are disrupting community ways of living and collective activities. This is highly concerning in all the coastal areas, but of course the Caribbean has a different behavior in comparison to other areas in the Pacific and other maritime areas that we have seen. Considering all of this, we are now discussing what is the opportunity that we have, for instance, to advocate for an international instrument like the Ocean Convention that for 20 years has been discussing different mechanisms. And one of the mechanisms that was addressed last year was, for instance, the role of peoples in terms of traditional knowledge to promote or to preserve genetic resources and biodiversity in maritime spaces. And our descendants were not summoned to be a part of the debate of the Ocean Convention, and there is a gap there. There is a neglect, and in terms of recommendations of the states to the peoples, we are trying to have this rights approach also for the instruments that are usually fully disconnected from the lives of our descendants in the different areas. That is of the utmost importance to expand the discussion to the rights over the ocean. Maybe this is not ownership, but there needs to be a right to use and to acknowledge ancestral knowledge that will definitely change the approach to include legitimate stakeholders that have been preserving the ocean and that are suffering climate change, and they're not stakeholders that are being considered or involved at the moment where the decisions are made regarding the coastal areas and the oceans, not only in the sense of preservation, but also urban planning, industrial planning, and everything that happens with the ocean, that it would seem to be that it has not involved indigenous peoples. So that is a concept that we have to include for your consideration. Thank you. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Omaira.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you, Mayra, Renata, and Mr. Joao Pedro for your contributions. And also this gives us step to the third block, to the other block, and the other block of panel members towards the look of setting in evidence possible paths towards new and better scenarios. And for that, we have the last few groups of panel members, and we also have Rosa Catrileo, Special Advisor for Indigenous and Afro-Descendant Affairs of the Unit of Coordination of Indigenous Affairs, and the Ministry of Social Development of Chile. So we also have Jose Absalon Suarez from the team of Territory and Environment for the Process of Black Communities of Colombia, Mr. John Anton Sanchez, a researcher of the Institute of High National Studies of Ecuador, Mr. David Pereira, Senior Consultant of the Tenure Facility, Mr. Álvaro Javier Arroyo Garcia, Director of the Direction for Equality of Black Afro-Descendant Community of the Ministry of Colombia, and Mr. Luana Pared de Oliveira, Technical Advisor of the Secretaries of Territories and Productive Systems of the Ministry of Agrarian Development and Family Agriculture of Brazil. So we start with Mrs. Rosa Catrileo. Rosa has the word, please.
Muchas gracias, Cecilia. No sé si me
Thank you
escuchan
very
bien.
much, Cecilia. I don't know if you can hear me.
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank you
primero
very
que
much.
todo, agradecer la
First of
invitación
all, I would
a
like to
esta
thank the
jornada. Para
invitation
nosotros
to
es superimportante. Hoy día
this
yo estoy encargada,
day.
como
For us, it's
decía
very
Cecilia,
important.
de la
I
unidad
am
de
in charge, as
coordinación
Cecilia was
nacional
saying, of the Unit
indígena
of
y
Coordination of Indigenous
afrodescendientes.
Affairs and
Hace muy
for
poquito
people of African descent.
pudimos
Very recently,
oficialmente cambiar
we
el
could
nombre
officially
de la
change
unidad
the
para
name of this
evidenciar
unit in
que
order
también
to
vamos a tener
show
un área de
evidence of the
trabajo
fact that we
en
will also have an area of
afrodescendencia.
work
Es la
for
primera
Afro-descendant
institucionalidad
work. So
social que
this is
tiene
the
el
first
Estado de
official
Chile
institution that
dirigida a
the
los
Chile state has that is
afrodescendientes.
intended for
Para mí
people
es
of African descent.
superimportante y
So
es un
this is a
gusto
very important
poder
milestone for
participar en
us, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this condition in the
Comentarles
seminar.
que
I would like to
esta
comment
unidad
to
depende
you
del
that this
Desarrollo
unit
Social y
is under the
Familiar, que es el
Ministry of
ministerio que está
Social Development
ha
and
estado
Family Ministry, which is the
trabajando
ministry has been
de,
working
en los desafíos que implica
in the
el reconocimiento
challenges
del
of
pueblo
the
y la raza
acknowledgement of
afrodescendientes
the
chilenos
tribal
y que por lo
people of
tanto
African
para
descent
nosotros
in
también es
Chile.
súper importante
And also for
dar
us, it's
cuenta
very
del
important
trabajo que hemos tenido
to show of the
como
work
país,
that we have
pero
had
también de los
as a
desafíos que
country and
tenemos hacia el
also
futuro. Y en ese
the challenges that
sentido,
we have towards the
compartir con
future.
ustedes
And
que
in that sense, also
Chile
share with you that
comparte
Chile
la situación o condición de
shares the
invisibilización
situation
que
or the condition of
expositores que me han
invisibilization
precedido han dado
that some
cuenta respecto
presenters that who have preceded me have taken
de la
into account
afrodescendencia. Hasta hace
regarding
muy poco Chile no
Afro-descendants.
reconocía la
So until very
existencia de
recently, Chile did not
afrodescendientes.
acknowledge
Eso cambió el año
the existence of
2019,
people of African descent, and that changed in
porque se produjo un
2019,
gran avance
where we had
en
a great
el ámbito
progress
nacional
in the
por,
national scope
con la ley
because with
25.051
law
que otorga reconocimiento legal a la
21,051
existencia del
that
pueblo
grants
local
legal
afrodescendiente chileno. Esta ley es del año
recognition
2019
to the
y
people
eso
of African
conlleva un
descent. This is a
desafío o ha
2019 law,
conllevado un
and this
desafío
means that
para
there's a
poder
challenge
implementarla, pero
in order
también para
to
poder
implement
socializar y
this, but
también
also to
poder
socialize
contribuir
it
a
and
que esta
be
condición
able
de
to contribute
invisibilización
to
que
the
había
fact that
tenido
this
el
condition of
pueblo y el
invisibility that
afrodescendiente
the
chileno se
tribal
revierta.
Afro-descendant people of Chile becomes averted.
Comentarles que
So I would like to
esta
comment
ley ha
that
generado
this law
avances
has
y desafíos
generated some
importantes para el
progress and
gobierno.
important challenges for the
En
government.
ese sentido,
In
lo
that
primero es
sense,
que
the first thing
se ha
here
trabajado
is
en la regulación
that we have
desde el
worked in the
reconocimiento y la
regulation
regulación
from
del
this
derecho de
acknowledgement
participación y
on the
consulta que
right of
tiene
participation and
ahora el pueblo
consultation
tribal afrodescendiente
that
chileno dentro
the
del ordenamiento
um,
jurídico chileno.
tribal people of American descent in Chile has. So I would like to tell you in the sense that we started that this administration or until the year this starts, we did not have any formal institution, as I was saying at the beginning. And now we do have some from adding the area work of Afrodescendants in the unit of coordination of Indigenous Affairs and for people of American descent in the social ministry. There was a commitment by President Gabriel Boric from the acknowledgement of this law of taking back on a process, which was the process of consultation, which is direct intended for the Chilean people in order to rule this right in the institution or in the legal ordainment in Chile. And that is why we took on a process that was suspended but under the petition of the people itself. And then we could, in 2022, 2023, we could work with the representative institutions of these people in order to achieve a ruling of the right for consultation in Chile. This process ended recently. We now have a set of rules for consultations, and we have been working since September 2022 with a methodological proposal in order to face this process. In November, we did the official relaunching of the process that is suspended, and that this government took this on again. We had some tenor releases in March 2023. The institutions made a counter proposal to the ruling that we have presented. Then we finished the process with some agreements, and we made a follow-up commission that had sessions until very recently. And from that commission, so we can guarantee the compliance with the agreements that we have seen in this process. And therefore, we have been in a constant dialogue with the institutions representative of the First and the people of Chile. The administrative closure of this process took place in November 2023. And the last session of the Commission of Follow-up, where we could see the commitments and all of the commitments, it was 31st of July this year. And therefore, we are very happy of having this milestone in La Moneda Palace of the new ruling. So this is to create institutionality that we have. And we have another challenge that we have been viewing of how do we generate public policy, something that we also mentioned, which is the lack of data. And we're in the process of data gathering now regarding the people of African descent and the tribal people as well. And this has led us to, in the census that we just, and in Chile, we have included questions related to the self-identification and the belonging of the people in this of African descent. So this is very important because when we have the results, we will be able to get true data regarding the number of people who self-identify as belonging to the tribe of people, and therefore we can generate public policies from those results. That is the first thing. Thank you very much. We're also working in adding in the social registry of households in the socioeconomic organization survey. We're working in the sociocultural matrix in order to identify the territory and the representative institutions so we can have a survey of them. Therefore, we are progressing in that area. What are the challenges is the generation of differentiated public policy. The indigenous people in Chile have, in terms of rurality, they have special programs of the indigenous program, which has allowed to generate policies in order to strengthen the rural development in the rural areas for people in the rural areas that are from African descent. So from this data, we can progress towards this challenge directly or more specifically to the tribal people of African descent in Chile. We have important challenge, which is the institutional strengthening from the officialization of the area of work of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Affairs, and also in how we work on this public policy for the other ministries. We can't just be having this in the Ministry of Social Development and Family, but we need to progress in the other ministries and also with policies intended for Afro descendants. So thank you, Cecilia, for this possibility of being able to present how we're working on in Chile and what is the task that is coming. Thank you very much, Rosa. Very important what is happening in Chile, and we thought it is crucial that you already are in these regional dialogues as well, participating. Please go ahead, José Absalón Suárez. The floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días con
Hello.
todos y con todas. José Absalón, con todas. José Absalón Suárez.
José Absalón Suárez of the team of Territory and Environment.
Y en este momento
ECLAC
estoy
community. I am now
presidencia de la República de
joining the
Colombia,
Vice Presidency of the Republic of Colombia and the Ministry of the Environment and everything related to the COP16 agenda. And I say this to say that in the COP16, the Afro-descendant people are trying to draft we're trying to work on the injustice in the system because there's an agreement about biological diversity in its preamble. An 8J article acknowledges as key stakeholders of the territories to the indigenous people and the local communities. And the Afro-descendant people of African descent that at the very least are in the Americas and the Caribbean don't have acknowledgement within this convention. Therefore, in these almost 30 years of development of the agreement of diversity, the vision and the interest of the people of African descent has been left outside of the definitions and guidelines of this commitment. So COP16 is a great opportunity to overcome that situation. I would like to mention something I would like to mention here is that José Luis and Mayra already talked about it, but I would like to point out here that the territorial mapping that these institutions have been doing has found data that for us is very important to point out, which is in the Americas and the Caribbean. People of African descent have a territorial presence of about 205 million of hectares. That is that in territory matters, people of African descent are insignificant for any global strategy of conservation. That is the Convention of Biological Diversity, but also the data of ECLAC also tell us that the population-wise, we're on average 134 million people of African descent in this continent, which means that we are about a third of the population of the continent, but that these territories that we habited ancestrally and traditionally are very important in terms of the system for biodiversity and climate action, given that the agro system and the jungle and the coastline. So these are systems that are the most substantial for any strategy of conservation of biodiversity and climate action. So we say here that here we have part of the arguments that we are drafting in order to make the most out of this COP16. So we can say, all right, this is time to end the situation of justice for the people of African descent. So for simple reasons, so people say that we are within the local communities. And of course, we have this exercise of the self-acknowledgement and the self-determination. We're not going to have this as local communities, only the people of African descent. We are in these territories, as I mentioned. But additionally, we have a system of ancestral knowledge associated to biodiversity. That is the biodiversity that exists in this continent. One of the key factors that has allowed for this to exist are the people of African descent, given that we develop a relationship and a system of knowledge associated to it that allows for this diversity to be used and be sustained in time, not only for the good of the people of African descent, but also for the health of the planet and for the good of all of mankind. In this context, we believe that COP16 will give us an opportunity to go deeper into this discussion. Now, we have talked to ourselves about the possibility of having two paths so this can be overcome. The first path that we're saying is in the new program of work of the 8J group, which is something that's going to be created for the work group of 8J. Within this work group, we have these elements and tasks. We're going to be incorporating the denomination of people of African descent. And this is going to be a the terminology of indigenous people. We want to have a side by side to the terminology of indigenous people, so we can express it and therefore have the possibility of joining conversations with the direct representation in the later implementation of this work program that we create that will be approved in this COP16. The second path that we're exploring is make a proposal in the plenary session, a proposal of decision that can be made raw or people and the communities of our consent in the agreement of biological diversity. This is a proposal that we're working on jointly with the government of Brazil, and we already have a proposal that we are seeing through the Secretariat and the agreement of biological diversity, so it can be part of the agenda of COP16, so we can take it to the plenary and hopefully it can be approved in a favorable way. So I put this here because we want to make the most out of this important event to gain solidarity for the important organisms such as the UN, FAO, for all the people who are part of this conversation, because we need and we invite them to please help us keep pushing so we can all make good deeds, so this decision on the African descendant people can be taken into account and can be ratified in COP16, so we can have an important triumph where we can overcome this injustice that the people of African descent have been the victim of. Later, also to Madam Ballesteros, who invited me to this event, and also to the colleagues, we will send you the proposal of the decision that we are proposing so you can have it, you can study it, and you can help us see this work of international lobby so this can be acknowledged. And finally, I would like to invite you to two important events that we're having. One event in the area in the 17th and 18th of October in the green area in the city of Cali. We have called it the Summit of Africa and Diaspora, where we are inviting delegates of the government, negotiators, representatives of civil society, so we can discuss regarding these affairs relating to the people of African affairs, so we can discuss this proposal, so we can take them to this high level groups, so we can give them to negotiators and heads of state so they can be discussed. And the second event is International Forum for African People that is going to take place on October 24th in the and we are making the scenario so we can make this part of the agenda, this interest that we have, so this can have some reciprocity in the Convention of Biological Identity. So I would like to say that this is part of the interest that we want to make the most out of. We want to take this opportunity to continue pushing. We invite you to cooperate with us so you can help us with this initiative and so we can approve it.
Muchas gracias, José. Aquí estamos. Y le
Thank
pasamos
you,
la
Jose. We are at your service if you need any help. And now I'd like to give the floor to John Anton. Go ahead, John. The floor is yours. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I'd like to apologize for the audio difficulties at the moment. Where I am, it is very rainy, but it's lovely because I am in the heart of the blackness of Colombia. And I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Sanchez, professor from the Institute of National Institutes, SINAN, of the University of the Equatorian State that has existed for 52 years. And I'd like to mention that I am part of the International Coalition for the Defense, Preservation, Protection of the Territories and the Environment, Use of Land, and Climate Change of the Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. Feel free to call us the coalition because we know it is a long name. However, the importance of the coalition is that we are over 50 organizations from 15 countries that are exclusively devoted to the defense of the territory. And I'd like to take this opportunity to propose two ideas. First, what are the political agendas that we are promoting overall? And I'd like to refer to the relationship between biodiversity, ancestral knowledge, and Afro-descendants in relation to the COP16. First of all, it is very important to consider the scenarios of international law that we are acknowledged as Afro-descendant peoples, and especially with the decision of 1996, we were already acknowledged as African American peoples, indigenous communities, and local communities. But in the Andes region, we were acknowledged explicitly, and we were given access to genetic resources and biodiversity as Afro-descendants as a people. However, this is only a very small issue when compared with the challenge that we have to be acknowledged as a people by COP16. We know very well that in Article 8J of the Biological Diversity Convention signed in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, the conditions of visibility and political empowerment of our descendants were very different than those 30 years later. Therefore, we believe that international law needs to move towards a third generation regarding our descendants. The first generation of international law were the charters to abolish slavery, in which we were acknowledged as people, humans. This was by the end of the 19th century. That is when we were acknowledged as people with the abolition of slavery. And then there was a fight for civil rights to be acknowledged as citizens, meaning that we were holders of rights just like any other human person in the framework of the General Charter of the Rights of the Men that were signed in France. And now we are facing the third generation, which is the recognition of us as people. Why is that? Because precisely Convention 169 of the ILO in its Article 1 and 2 does not say that it's indigenous peoples or tribal peoples, but it poses certain features for people to be acknowledged as such. And in the case of tribal peoples, we fulfill all three requirements of the 169 Convention. We have awareness of our own identity. We existed before national states, and we have our own traditional institutions that are still upheld. But beyond that, there is long-standing jurisprudence in Latin America of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that acknowledges us as tribal peoples in countries that have already issued specific legislation, as it is the case of Costa Rica and Chile. These acknowledgements have to be done not only by COP16, but also by different drafts of declarations of rights of our descendants carried out by the Intergovernmental Group of the UN that will meet on January 13th. It is also necessary that the OAS project, or I'm sorry, Bill of Declaration of Rights acknowledges us as what we are, which is Afro-descendant people. Now, lastly, I'd like to refer to I'd like to refer to biodiversity. Please let me know when I'm running out of time. The recognition of Afro-descendant peoples requires a policy of preservation of biodiversity, which should never be removed or separated from processes of respect of territorial rights and territorial ownership. We need to have governance over our territories. We need to have control and autonomy on the biodiversity resources and genetic resources, and also protection of our ancestral knowledge in such a way that the invitation for FAO is that you support us along the process to promote the rights to land tenure, to guarantee, first of all, our food security, secondly, food sovereignty, traditional practices of production, and also sustainable farming and agriculture. As Juan Garcia, our leader in Ecuador, said, the word is already out there.
Muchas gracias, John. Muchísimas gracias por tu participación.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for that participation. And now we'd like to give the floor to Davi Pereira from Tenure Facility. Good morning, everyone. My name is Davi Pereira. I am a consultant from Brazil.
A Tenure tem atuação.
And up until this moment, we have had a world-level participation with over 25 countries with 35 different projects in Brazil. We have 4 projects ongoing. We also work in 8 countries of Latin America, and the main focus of our work is to be able to support indigenous communities, Afro-descendant communities, specifically in the case of Brazil as the Quilombolas and also other local communities. In Brazil, currently, our main work has been conducted in the Amazon region. We are supporting the indigenous peoples and also Quilombolas communities. We have 2 projects undergoing, and the main approach has been with the Quilombolas communities along the process of their territorial claims. At the moment, we have 2 projects ongoing, one with CONAC that has as the main goal to support in the process of land ownership to conduct it in a faster manner for 100 communities in Maranhão and other regions. And the main objective is to give title of ownership to 100 territories in the state of Pará. What the institution does is to directly fund local communities or their partners in order to help create a relationship with the government sector, with the private sector, that also makes available other aspects for the process of implementation of the right to ownership, and also to strengthen the regulatory framework and to speed up the granting of ownership titles, acknowledging the rights of Afro-descendant peoples because they are safeguarders of kilometers and kilometers of areas of forests and others, mainly in the area of the Amazon, because 35% of the Quilombola population is located in 7 states in the Amazon that 9 of those have certain communities. However, there are 7 Quilombolas communities, and those states are located in the Amazon surroundings. We acknowledge the fight, the struggle of the communities along the journey to protect the Amazon, to protect the wild lands and The purpose is to give territorial security to the Quilombola communities, to protect the territories, to protect the biodiversity, to protect the Amazon jungle. And as a consequence of that, we protect the biodiversity. And the idea is to obtain and promote funding for climate justice for the peoples. And with that, we have invested in the Quilombola communities. In relation to the Quilombola communities, both projects that we have undergoing at the moment, one with Kunak and the other one with Malumbo, have the purpose of protecting up to 3 million hectares around the Amazon forest. And there is a very important engagement with the communities, and we also fund the process of political resistance. Among those, we can quote the agreement that was signed with the Institute of Lands in the state of Maranhão to promote and facilitate the production of technical elements. We also have an agreement with the National Institute of the Agrarian Reform, and we have signed an agreement between Intra and Sinaki, and for that, we articulate with the universities, especially in Maranhão, because they are our partners. We also work to conduct cartography and to develop a mapping of the state of Maranhão to provide technical input in order to produce knowledge internally through INCRA. There is another mechanism that we use, which is financing for or to provide stability and autonomy to the different groups along the process. Thank you so much. Now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Álvaro Arroyo Garcia from Colombia. Please, the floor is yours.
Buenos días para todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much on behalf of the Vice President of the Republic, Minister of Equality, Francia Marquez, for this very important initiative that looks to promote the recognition and the fulfillment of the rights of Afro-descendants. From the Ministry of Equality and from the government, we are ratifying the commitment to promote the fulfillment of rights of the Afro-descendant community, the Palenque community, especially in relation to the rights of Afro-Colombian community that inhabits rural areas. We know that they need to sustain themselves in their ancestral territories, and we would like to highlight that in our programs, especially those related to promoting self-sustained economies and in the framework of fulfilling their rights, we are betting on promoting their permanence in their territories. And secondly, there is a program to preserve the territories, and we want to generate mechanisms to guarantee the different instruments and also instances like the Guardia Cimarrona, which is a way in which the Afro-Colombian people protect their territories and natural resources. In 2023, we signed an MOU with the Ministry of Racial Equality of Brazil, and the MOU aims at strengthening the international collaboration to promote the rights of the Afro-descendant communities in rural areas. And in the framework of the MOU, we've been working on the implementation of the program Quilombo de las Américas. This is a program, Quilombo of the Americas, which has as its main objective to promote racial equality and environmental and climate justice, as well as promoting access to territorial rights from the Afro-rural communities in the Americas, to promote a network of interinstitutional cooperation to promote international cooperation projects in the region. We have certain indicators As part of the program that we would like to highlight, some indicators are, for instance, the creation of a network for technical cooperation, community experiences to strengthen the management of natural resources, ancestral knowledge and practices of reproduction of that knowledge. Likewise, other indicators have to do with technical cooperation projects and the strengthening and realization of projects for the implementation of different policies as community strategies of resistance. Finally, we would like to highlight the importance of the COP16 in the situation in order to continue promoting, especially the recognition of the Convention of Biological Diversity and the participation of Afro-descendant peoples as a people instead of local communities, ratifying the commitment from the minister, from our ministry to and from the national government. We are willing to continue on with a partnership to promote the rights of Afro-descendant peoples in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Álvaro Arroyo. And to close this panel, we give the floor to Luana. Luana Paredes de Oliveira from Brazil.
Bom dia a todos e a todas.
Good morning, everyone.
Aqui eu estou representando.
I am here representing.
Sou analista técnica de políticas sociais. E eu estou aqui representando o secretário Edmilton
I'm from the area of social policies, and I represent the Secretary, National Secretary of Territories and Quilombolas and Traditional Systems and the Ministry of Agrarian Development of Brazil. I also would like to thank for the invitation to participate in this important regional dialogue for Latin America and the Caribbean. This is an initiative of FAO that can be with this debate that is so important and so necessary to be able to protect all of these areas. I really thank FAO. I'd like to thank FAO and everyone here. It is very hard, actually.
Essa tarefa, né, de falar depois de falas tão brilhantes, né, dos meus companheiros de mesa.
Speaking of people who are so bright, my partners, everyone who's here today, and that took me to several reflections of what happens in Brazil regarding FAO and all of the things with the Black people in the rural area in our Latin American context. So we have all done some progress, but we have an important dialogue already for some time. But there were some challenges, which is to create an Afro-Latin American environment and also analyze the national specificities. We should have a coherent, consistent policy that would overcome national policies, and that also can be a space for the Black communities for Latin America and the Caribbean, because the people who spoke already consider all of these important points. So finding a person that already built these important alliances that we had here. I also like to talk about the possible paths of national policies for Latin America and the regional ones as well, and also for the Afro-descendant populations. First, I would like to see a context that what is for the people of African descent in Brazil. We saw the territorial part, which was some progress that came through the rural Black movement. We also have the urban part. It is a great support, it's a great progress in the standards. It came in the rural area with the Constitution 1978. The compulsory measurement of including the quilombolas areas, and that also we didn't know how this would be between the quilombolas that are these traditional tribes And all of the processes that came from that determination, several of them.
Da própria
Many
Conferência
of
de
these
Durban,
were developed from the conference itself,
negra, né, na pauta da
where the
afrodescendência,
state,
considering
considering Afro and Black people, it is an essential thing of the Constitution for all of the standard part to acknowledge the Black population of Brazil and also Latin America and the Caribbean.
que a partir disso se
It
criaram uma
is
série
important to know that from that
reconhecimentos legais no
we saw
Brasil.
a series
Trabalha
of legal acknowledgements in Brazil, and we work with 2 decrees of 2007,
E o decreto 8750 de
the Sustainable
2016
Development National Policy, and also in 2016 another that also the state of community.
segmentos de povos e comunidades tradicionais,
But we have 28 already,
né? Então coloca as populações quilombolas,
where
né,
it
os povos
represents a majority, which is the
todos os demais povos e
Quilombolas
comunidades
population, indigenous populations, and all of the other peoples and communities where the Black population is quite abundant.
populações que são
We have some Previva and different groups and populations that are in the whole national territory and others that are distributed in other areas. So in that sense, what's important to mention here,
afro-rural,
Brazil or
aqui nós já tivemos
has knowledge of the importance of rurality.
o Ministério da Igualdade Racial,
Therefore,
o MPI, né, o Ministério dos Povos
we need
Indígenas,
to bring together the whole racial part.
né, que
We have
faz
some
parte
colleagues
dessa
from INCRA
reconstituição do INCRA, né, com a diretoria que
that
trabalha
also
especificamente
took
com o
part.
reconhecimento dos territórios quilombolas.
They also
E que é o
participate in the
executor
Constitution and work with the Quilombola territories.
essencial no Estado.
And they were the executor of this essential policy.
Então, a fala da colega
And the whole
Joana trouxe
part was also included here.
essa questão
Joanna also spoke about that point,
dos mares, né,
that
dos oceanos,
importance of this acknowledgement
e dentro do
of the
MDA,
oceans, the seas, and the people, and also the agrarian reform
se reconheceu a importância de estabelecer uma instância
when it was
federal
created. So we established an instance to define the specific policies
que
in
dentro de
the
todos os
scope of inclusion of the
em
people,
todos os aspectos, é um item essencial para a
especially all of the
autonomia
aspects
as formas de fazer e
of the
viver
autonomy
e
of the people, of how can they survive,
econômicas da
and
sustentabilidade.
also the economic and financial part of sustainability.
Que no âmbito do MDA foram criados
So
dois
here we
programas
have
que
some
são
progress,
programa de apoio e fortalecimento ao
and
eixo
through
do
some
desenvolvimento,
programs and structuring
com o objetivo
programs,
apoiar e
we also
fortalecer
have the
ações que
development,
visam a sustentabilidade produtiva e o
strengthening
etnodesenvolvimento dos
actions,
povos e comunidades tradicionais.
and the whole
E o
productive
programa de
sustainability and the
apoio à
development as
estratégia
well
do território e a proteção
of the
socioterritorial de
people.
povos
So
e
therefore, we
comunidades
need to
tradicionais. Esse programa
have the
esse programa se
territory,
chama
and we also
Território
need to
Tradicional, e que
address
tem como objetivo apoiar a regularização
this.
fundiária de territórios e povos e
So
comunidades
the
tradicionais.
objective of these territories is to support several people.
Tem uma estruturação normativa para isso, uma
So the
legislação
Quilombolas in
própria.
Brazil that have situation
Todos os demais
have
27 povos,
their own legislation. All of the others, the 27 people are 26,
não têm esse reconhecimento,
but we
né?
try to help them all.
Estamos trabalhando
And
com
they don't have that difference.
de trazer
So
esse
we are
reconhecimento
working
normativo
on that
para todos os demais povos e
process
comunidades
of
tradicionais,
bringing this
que
knowledge
inclui
for all of the other people and communities that
o
include
censo
meaningfully
2022,
the Black
que foi
population
inovador no
from
Brasil em
2022.
trazer o censo
That
indígena
was
e
very
censo
innovative in
quilombola,
Brazil in bringing the
trouxe
indigenous census
essa
and also the Quilombolas
oficialidade, né, de uma forma que
populations,
já
and
se
also
incluía,
it
mas
brought
trouxe isso para a
that
pauta, para a
official
discussão.
part,
E juntamente, tanto o censo quanto a
and
construção desses
also
programas, o próprio ODS-18,
also
né, que dentro do Objetivo de Desenvolvimento Sustentável
this was in
são
2018. The development of
incorporação
this
do
program was
Brasil,
very
né,
important.
o ODS de Igualdade Racial e a Agenda 2030 para
We
os
have the
povos e comunidades
SDGs in terms
tradicionais,
of race,
trabalhando com esse contexto e nos colocamos, então, dentro do MDA e da CETEC
And we're working with them.
ambiente de apoio
So
a
therefore, we
todos
have
os nossos
CITEC in an environment of support for all of our partners in the state for the good living in order to defend the rights of people of African descent in Latin America. Thank you very much. It is an honor to continue working with CETEC and also MDA side by side. So well, and we've come to the end of our panels. We really would like to thank you for that. But before we go away, Silma Borneo from the National Coalition, a great ally in all of this agenda of Afro-rurality, she's going to be offering a highlight of the main points that we've heard here, so we can have that all very fresh. And we hear you, Silema.
Muchas gracias, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Gracias, Cecilia. Sí, gran desafío porque
Thank
realmente
you
han
very
sido
much. Great
excelentes
challenge
panelistas,
because this has
contribuciones,
been great
y son
panel members and
muchísimos temas que
contributions.
son relevantes
And
cuando
these are
hablamos de
many topics that are relevant when we talk about
Lo
Afro-rurality.
primero que creo que salta a la vista cuando hablamos
The
de
first thing
afro-ruralidad en América
when we
Latina
talk about Afro-rurality in Latin America is that we need to consider their importance because they are relevant in the region in a quantitative way. So the figures are important. 154 million of Afro-descendant population, 26 million of rural people of African descent, 23% of the rural people of Latin America is Afro-descendant. So these are huge numbers and can't be avoided. So also, we have the qualitative importance of all of these. They fulfill an important role, as they have acknowledged, such as all of the panel members have intervened to face the crisis of biodiversity, and also a huge contribution to the generation of food, food sovereignty, the people and the countries. So this importance, this quantitative importance, we also add the qualitative importance, but also we need to consider that there is an historic debt facing the Afro-descendant population because of the slavery that we've lived in all of the region.
Ahora, en cuanto a los temas relevantes que han
Now,
ido
regarding the
surgiendo,
relevant topics that we have been seeing here, the first one that is more striking regarding most of the intervention has to do with the issue of land and territory. I'm very pleased to hear and acknowledge this because the International Coalition for Land, where I work on, this is our key topic.
está en las agendas de las organizaciones afro y de los organismos internacionales y de los gobiernos.
So this is the international governments, of the governments, and the importance of acknowledging the ancestral territory.
Pero en segundo lugar, reconociendo el rol
Because it's the
central
right, and we also acknowledge the key role that the Afro-descendant people play with in order to
al cambio climático. Y para hacer
conserve
eso,
biodiversity and adapt and mitigate climate change. In order to do this effectively, we need to acknowledge the right of access and use of land and also progress with their territories. So very much into this, considering this importance of the territory importance, where we talk about some figures and we see that there are more than 200 million hectares where the Afro population in Latin America is present. So they also have a presence in all the ecosystems. As Omar was saying, in these territories, we have a high value of biodiversity. These are hotspots of biodiversity. So this is an important message for COP16. There's no possible contribution to the conservation of biodiversity by a population that is so important in the Latin American territory if we don't have an acknowledgement of their territory. Another issue that concerns in here is the importance of acknowledge the Afro people in the international sphere, in the multilateralism, and this is also something the COP needs to take into account, such as the civil society and other governments are stated. So this issue of the acknowledgement of the Afro people is also linked to other fundamental topics that have gone in different moments, which is the issue of participation, the need for the population and the people of African descent that will have more light in other spaces of negotiation and public policies, and the definition of international instruments and agreements, because what we see here is that we still have great absence. Another issue that we mentioned and has been mentioned by some panel members is the issue of autonomy and self-determination, centrality, acknowledging this right that is closely linked to the right of land and territory. There should be an acknowledgement of the possibility of the people of African descent to define their own ways of development and implement their own mechanisms for management their natural resources of their territories. And this is also linked with something that has mentioned, which is when we have policies for conservation that do not acknowledge their present, they don't acknowledge their autonomy in the territories, the contribution and rights. The importance that the policies linked to conservation do not forget in this great biodiversity and nurture in the territory. We should remember that we have people that have rights and that they have central knowledge for the conservation.
That is another point that was mentioned that has to do with traditional knowledge of Afro-descendants people of Latin America, the importance to give it visibility and to involve it in the political frameworks and solutions proposed by governments. Somebody talked about innovation, and that is key. There are many Afro-descendant peoples that are conducting innovation, and that is not acknowledged. Another key issue has to do with the data. There is an urgent need for generating more data from different populations, geo-referenced data, which is ultimately important for the acknowledgement of their territorial claims and to acknowledge their contribution towards the preservation of the biodiversity in the territories. Another issue that was mentioned is the importance of considering the context in which we live in Latin America and that affect Afro populations. It has been mentioned that we live in a certain economic system that promotes the land concentration, that promotes industrial activities, extractive activities that affect the rights of Afro-descendant peoples and their territorial rights with forced displacements and uprooting. So let's not lose sight of that. We need to take action to defend the Afro population in their territories, and we have to defend the human lives that are many times affected and that are removed from their lands. Finally, political action in place. What I have seen so far is that there's already a movement from the civil society. There is this beautiful coalition that was created. It already has a roadmap that is promoted and shared by many organizations, and there has been progress from the governments. Brazil, Colombia, Chile, several governments have been reforming their regulatory frameworks, their institutionality with the creation of new entities, formal entities, and that is also an instance of action. However, we have seen that it is not enough. Omaira talked about certain numbers, studies that have to do with the public formal recognition, and she started by saying that 8 countries have acknowledged the rights of Afro-descendants in their countries, and there are 17 countries in which there is presence of the Afro-descendant peoples, and of the 8 countries, only 6 have acknowledgement of Afro-descendant peoples in their constitutions, and only 4, and so on and so forth. Only 4 countries have acknowledged specifically the collective rights of or to land ownership. So there's so much to be done still, and the effort has to be around strengthening the policies and public institutionality, but also using international instances at our hands. Let's say COP16, COP30, and now wrapping up, I wanted to show you that between COP16 and COP30, there's one event that will take place in Colombia, which is a Global Forum of the Earth, and it will take place organized by a large number of organizations in Colombia in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture of Colombia with the international coalition. And this is our flagship event organized every 3 years that gathers civil society and governments to engage in a political dialogue and also to exchange learning among the different peoples. It will take place in June 2025. And we hope that this is an opportunity for the Afro-descendant peoples between the COP16 and the COP30 to have a declaration prepared for these national land coalitions, including the Afro-descendant peoples, their claims, their contributions, and their key role for preservation and to face the major crisis that we are undergoing, for instance, the environmental crisis and also the food crisis. So that is what I wanted to mention. Cecilia, I hope I was able to gather the key takeaways. It was a huge task that you had, Sulema. Thank you so much for conducting the effort. I'd like to thank the panel members and please, Eve Crowley, closing remarks to finalize the dialogue that was very fruitful, that leaves us with many challenges ahead. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for allowing me to stay and listen to the reflections, experiences, and the great summary that was given by Sulema. I will not repeat any of it because I think that she did a great job, actually. I'd like to highlight a few points that maybe were missing and that we could include. First, the concept that Afro-descendants are among the peoples that suffer the greatest inequality within inequality. This is a combination of factors that make many Afro-descendant peoples to be in the most neglected positions within the region, apart from the territories that Sulema referred to. We'd like to add the maritime areas and coastal areas. Also, there is a need for guaranteeing access to basic services. And this is a particularly difficult situation for our descendant peoples in rural areas, namely education, health, technical assistance. It was mentioned during the discussion, but not in the final summary. And I think it is a reality that we have to face. Also, apart from the new political institutionality, as Sulema said, we could add another point that was mentioned regarding the need for cross-sectional, overarching responsibility within all the ministries, because this is a responsibility of everyone. It is important to have a devoted national institutionality. Yes, definitely. Without this, we are not going to move forward. But also it needs to be a comprehensive concern from all the ministries. I think in the summary, we also need to include a reference to women specifically and to intersectional discrimination that women who are rural Afro-descendants suffer. There is a strong point regarding funding to fight the fight in its different dimensions that needs to be acknowledged as well. And I think that this is a conversation that needs to continue on. This is just part of the process. We are not done with this. What was missing today was maybe a conversation about what to do. What do we do to guarantee that there are economic opportunities, that there are collective rights to land tenure? Yes, that's a condition for economic development. However, this is something that deserves a conversation. It could be part of the ongoing dialogue. And lastly, I wanted to thank you once again for the opportunity. Thank you to the organizers for this very important instance. And thank you everyone for being so open, because all together we will continue fighting for the progress of the rights of Afro-descendants, and FAO is definitely willing to continue to support you. Thank you once again. Thank you and see you soon, everyone.
Hasta luego. Muchísimas gracias. Hasta luego.